What's your favorite oops, I just really fucked up moment? I was a brand new, right out of college computer programmer, back before we had software developers. We worked on mini computers at the time, and I had a long process that I needed to run, which tied up my terminal. I went into the storage closet and dragged out another terminal so that I could do stuff while the process ran, an old version of multitasking. You kids have no idea how easy you have it nowadays. Well, because the new kid had two terminals, none of the other programmers wanted to look less productive, so everyone else did that. Then a week or so later, the president of the company came back to the programmer area so he could mess around with some new hardware that came in. He looked around and said, "Looks like everybody has two terminals now." Being a smartass, I quickly quipped, "Well, we all have two hands," which was met with silence. Usually my quips get at least a chuckle. It was then that I remembered that the president of the company did not, in fact, have two hands. He had a birth defect and one did not develop properly. Story 2. It was my first day as a help desk technician. I had been asked to change the printer toner on the main printer in the company office. I pulled the black toner out and I dropped it. The thing exploded like it was a New Year's fireworks show. All over me, all over the floor, all over the printer. Even 10 years later, I still think they're digging toner out of the cubicle. I looked like one of those cartoon images where Elmer Fudd was given a bomb just before it exploded and then it blew up. Fortunately, my boss was my friend, and he laughed his ass off. Photos, email distribution, the works. I made my best effort to clean it up until the facilities guy shoved me aside and said, "Let me do it," with his nuclear-powered backpack vacuum. I'm just glad it wasn't the yellow I dropped. I didn't want to look like I peed my pants all day. Story 3. I had just started a new job as a registered sales assistant at a major firm. All fresh and excited with my new Series 7, I was ready to do trades. My supervisor handed me a client statement and told me to liquidate the holdings. Not noticing some of the holdings were highlighted, I proceeded to liquidate the entire account instead of about 25% of it. Worst part, I didn't realize it until she came over. She could see the trades in real time as I was selling, and asked me what was I doing. I got red, heated, and ran to compliance to get it fixed. Our compliance officer told me to dry my tears, take a walk, and have a Coke. He called it my rite of passage. Never had another trading error. Story 4. My brother tells a tale of woe about the day his college GF was obviously just itching for a fight. They were hanging out when she complained about the weight she'd gained. He said he hadn't noticed. She called him a liar. He maintained that he hadn't noticed. Finally, she said, "Dude, I'm exactly 5 feet tall and I've gone from 100 pounds to 110. That's like 20 pounds on a regular size person. How could you not notice? Either you're lying or you don't notice me at all. So which is it?" So bro finally and reluctantly said, "I guess I can see it a little, but you look." She immediately interrupted with, "Oh, I can't believe you just called me fat." This led to the biggest fight they'd ever had until their eventual breakup a full 2 years later. Story 5. Recommended a buddy of mine to work with me, gave him extremely high praises because he truly does deserve it. He failed the substances test. They found CK in his system. Last time I ever recommend anyone for a job. Story 6. I got a text from one of my higher-ups in the military about needing to change barracks rooms, and he had a giddy tone. So I immediately screenshotted it and sent it to my GF with the caption, "Look at this git." But as soon as I hit send, I sent it back to him instead. The following days were not fun for me. Story 7. Got a basketball stuck high up in a tree one time. I thought it would be a good idea to throw a rock at it to dislodge it. My dad's car was under the tree and the rock went right through the windshield on the way down. Story 8. Coaching my young, 7-year-old son's hockey team. And after a few practices, I just have to walk up to one of the mothers. "Excuse me, but is there any chance you have a younger sister that went to XX high school?" "Mother, it's me." Story 9. We were shooting for a small short film in my school a few months back. I was making a small music video alongside it. We finished shooting for both at the same time, and I left them there for a few weeks, unedited because I got caught up with exams and was just plain stressed every day. 2 days before we were supposed to submit the short film and the music video, I sat on them to edit. I edited for about 14 hours across a 16-hour window and submitted them both, the short film to the short film competition and the music video to another one. Except I didn't. The music video went to the short film event, the short film went to the music video event. Needless to say, both of them tanked. Story 10. Somehow when I was in high school, late 90s, everyone who still lived at home at the time had waterbeds, which made moving into a new house a bit of a pain in the ass. I remember getting all of the beds set up and having the garden hose in the last one to fill it up. While this is happening, the van with the rest of the house in it arrived and everyone goes to start unloading. No one is watching this last waterbed fill. Several hours later, over pizza, my sister comes into the kitchen and says that the carpet in the hallway is wet. And we all had a collective, really ducked up moment. The bed had overfilled to the point that the fill nozzle was like 3 feet over the sides of the frame. The mattress was horribly stretched. The hose had detached and was just dumping onto the floor. It took several hours to shop vac the water out of the carpet, but we were able to deflate and salvage the mattress at least. Story 11. Well, I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but it's one that haunts me the most. When I was in college, I went to a computer in the school library. They were on these big circular desks with computers all around. It was morning, so I was kind of tired. Some people were on the computers working already, and me being kind of tired still. I sat there, got on a computer, and then I stretched my arms and then stretched my legs out. And unfortunately, the power strip for the computers was near me on my side, and my foot is the button on the power strip and turned off all the computers on that desk. I don't remember what she looked like, but I still remember the kind of look of quiet anger and frustration of this girl that was working on a paper, just suddenly lose all of her work. She just quietly got up and walked away. I would have felt better if she just stood up and punched me in the face. Story 12. I was fresh out of undergrad and working at a small university. One of my coworkers came out crying, so I asked her what was wrong. She said she just got a phone call that her sister lost her leg. I didn't mean to say it, but my brain decided for me, and I replied to her, "Oh, well, I hope she finds it." Her sister's leg was run over and removed by a trolley. They did not need help locating it. She did take the joke like a champ, though, and even thanked me later for adding some lighthearted humor and making her laugh. Like her sister's leg, I left the part where I didn't mean to say it cut off. Story 13. When I was in college and my dad lived in DC, he bought me a plane ticket to go visit him. I went to Texas AANDM, so the closest major city was Houston, and I'd never flown out of there before. So I arrive at the airport about an hour and a half before my flight, and I can't find the check-in for Southwest Airlines. So I asked an airport employee, and he gave me this look like, "Dude, please tell me you're not being serious right now." I was at IAH, and Southwest only flies out of Hobby, which is all the way on the other side of Houston, and it was rush hour. I did not make the flight. Story 14. Not me, but my, now, husband. I have very weak wrists that will hurt easily. Early on in our dating relationship, I was giving him BJ. He was laying on the bed, and I was supporting my body weight on my wrists, which hurt. He said, "What you need is one of those whale slings." He meant something that would take the pressure off my wrists. But maybe don't suggest your GF needs anything fit for a whale mid-slabbing. It's been 10 years, and I still tease him about it. Story 15. I just started a new chefing job at my dream restaurant. I had been there for a couple weeks and prepping in the back kitchen when I went to put a cutting board back on the rack. I didn't realize it was falling to the side, and it was too late when hundreds, if not thousands of dollars of restaurant white dishware fell, shattering to the ground. Plates, bowls, ramekins, trays, you name it. Still can't believe they kept me. Story 16. It was back in my school days when I was around 12 or 13. We had an exam, and I didn't pass it because I was too lazy to study, like most of the time. But this time, I actually failed. On the day I got the exam back, I just put it in my backpack and went home. My mom knew I had a test the week before, so she asked me if I'd received the results. Since it was a Friday, I told her, no, not yet, because I wanted to enjoy a nice weekend. She didn't ask any further, so I dropped my bag in my room and had an amazing Friday. The next day, I went out grocery shopping or something like that with my dad while my mom stayed home to prepare lunch. While she was in the kitchen, she also decided to turn on the dishwasher and went looking for the lunchbox she'd given me for school. It was in my backpack. While looking for the lunchbox, she also found the failed exam. Well, I think you can all imagine how thrilled my mom was when I came back home with my dad. Story 17. A few years ago, I was working at an HMV online warehouse back when CDs and DVDs were still a thing. We had this persistent issue that had been dragging on for months. At one point, some big bosses came for a visit, including the CEO of the entire company. During the visit, one of the floor staff decided to ask the CEO about the issue in front of the entire workforce. He played along and said he'd look into it, which we all knew was unlikely since it was so far below his pay grade. Fast forward a few weeks, and I was sending yet another email about the same issue. Half jokingly, I added, as CEO's name said, he would look into it. The problem? I wasn't 100% sure how to spell his name, so I started typing it into the CC field to let it auto-populate, thinking I'd delete it after, except I didn't. I hit send. So now the CEO had an email from some nobody 75 levels below him, looking like I was whining and holding him personally accountable for an issue he definitely didn't need to deal with. I imagine he opened that email like, who is this guy? Thankfully, my manager was an absolute legend. After laughing his head off at my expense, he smoothed things over by sending an apology email on my behalf. I'm getting a hot neck just thinking about it. Story 18. When I was 19, I was driving my dad's Cherokee in the woods on a 2-track. It wasn't anything too wild, and I knew the way, but I unfortunately hit a stick or a stub or something that popped the tire instantly. I hopped out and looked for a spare, but there wasn't one under the trunk cover. It may have been suspended under the chassis, but I didn't know to look there. I had to call my sick mom and wake her up so she could come pick me and my GF up out of the woods. Had to leave the Jeep sitting there. The next day, I rode with our mechanic down the trail so he could tow it out. He had to hop out and use a hatchet to cut out a small tree that was blocking the way of his tall tow truck. He almost threw out his back. I felt like crap just watching him. The tire pop was an accident, but the lesson learned that day was make sure you have a spare and know how to change it. Story 19. I used to work the receiving dock and knew all the truck drivers. One was Bob, 6 inches and built like an NFL player. I transferred to the second plant about 4 miles down the road, and it was mostly new hires who didn't know me or that I used to work receiving. One day, Bob shows up because his load needed to be dropped at the second plant. It was just about lunchtime, so he said he would wait. A bunch of us and Bob went to the bathroom to wash up for lunch. Bob sighed, and I said, "Cheer up, it could be worse." "It already is. My wife thinks she is pregnant." Without hesitation, I replied, "So, is it yours?" Everyone in the room had eyes, and they were all thinking this guy has done ducked up and is about to be beaten to death. Bob just looked at me and said, "Yeah." That was the first thing I asked her. Story 20. As a brand new Army 2 LT, I sank a brand new Jeep. I was ordered to lead a platoon of tanks to a target area, and to use this Jeep without a driver to do so. After 3 miles of trucking along range trails, I came to a ford across the Upatoy Creek at Benning, now FD Moore. It had rained heavily the night before, and the 40 feet wide, 6 inches deep creek was now about 300 feet wide and of unknown depth. I sent the tanks across carefully, watching how high the water came up the road wheels, the wheels the tracks roll across. It was about 10-12 inches. I thought, this Jeep can handle that, and waved the tanks on the other side to continue on while I crossed. I entered the creek and immediately started crabbed about 20-30 degrees as the Jeep slipped on the gravel underneath because of the current hitting the Jeep's body. I was as nervous as a cat on a pool float. I crept across, and when not quite one halfway across, the front of the Jeep started dropping into the water. I quickly hit the master switch to kill the engine, stood on my seat, and then as the Jeep kept sinking, climbed up on the rear corner where radio shelf mount. The problem was that I had forgot about a tank's ability to cross something like a trench on its tracks, and thus the new cut in the bottom of the stream bed wasn't reflected in the depth shown on the road wheels. There I was standing on the rear corner of a brand new Jeep, 12 miles on it, in the middle of a flooded stream. Only my boots, the radio antenna, and the windshield were out of the water. I thought, well, this Jeep is new. Hopefully the self-sealing system works to keep water out of everything. Because new vehicles' self-sealing stuff frequently needs tuning by the mechanics to work properly. Then I wondered, how long does it take to pay for a Jeep on a 2 LT's pay? Then I realized, crap, this current is strong enough to keep me off my feet and could kill me. I stood on this Jeep in the middle of this storm-flooded creek for about 5 minutes before I heard the roar of a tank's engines. As the tank came into view, the tank commander, TC, started laughing his ass off, then leaned down and shouted something into the tank. All the hatches popped open and heads popped out, with the rest of the tank crew laughing their asses off. The tank backed into the water, pulled to a stop next to the submerged Jeep, and said, "Okay, sir, how do you want to handle this?" "Well, Sergeant, someone needs to get in the water and attach a tow cable and pull this Jeep back to where it started." "Well, Lieutenant, nobody in this tank sank that brand new Jeep." "There's the tow cable," pointing to the tow cable. So holding onto the Jeep and the tank, I got in the water, grabbed 2 cables, and then used it to connect the 2 vehicles. The tank then hauled the Jeep back to the bank where we watched water drain out of everything, including the muffler exhaust pipe. I hopped in, flipped the master switch, and the engine started immediately. "I trust, Sergeant, that you and your crew aren't going to mention this to anyone." "Sir, of course we won't." Story 21. I was hacking my way through the woods with a machete when instead of cutting through a vine, it redirected the force downward. I looked down and noticed a hole in my pants. I tried to take a step, and then I knew something was wrong. I had hacked into my shin, just below the knee. It took a few minutes to really start bleeding. It was just this big open cut. Story 22. Ran into a roll-up door with a forklift while carrying a pallet, which is like rule number 1 of forklift operation. Forgot to put the damn fork down and really forked it up. Lab manager had to take my license away and also made all the engineers do an impromptu basic recertification to keep their forklift privileges. Story 23. My friend's kid asked me to tell them a joke, and as soon as I started it, I realized I ducked up and was telling an off-color joke. I had to panic, find a better punchline. I felt like I unducked up, but it turns out the kid got his whole 3rd grade class telling the joke endlessly because they just thought it was silly. The teacher wrote a note home to make the parents aware, and that though the kids didn't fully understand it, the teachers and staff knew it was a dirty joke. This was 10+ years ago, and they still signed their Christmas card to us, "Thanks again for that joke." The joke: why does an elephant have 4 feet? Because he'd look pretty ducking silly with just 4 inches. The punchline I substituted because he'd look silly with just 1. Story 24. I once got chlamydia and decided to tell my sexual partners from the past 6 months to get tested just to be sure. I opened up Facebook and messaged one I had been with at just about the 6-month mark. After I clicked send, I realized I was logged into a different woman's account that I was seeing at the present time who had used my computer and forgot to log out. I couldn't help but sit there and shake my head at my mistake. And yes, I had very awkward conversations with both of them after that. Story 25. Years ago, when I was an apprentice coachmaker, I was given the job of doing a refurb on a bus in our garage that was the manager's baby. And the garage show bus got taken along to bus rallies and was in TV appearances. Was often seen in the background of UK soap EastEnders. It was on old Routemaster, so I had to redo all the interior flooring as close to the original as possible and replace most of the body panels ready for a shiny new repaint. Because this bus was kept to original, it had quirks that had been modified on others, one of which was a route number display on the offside. I had to change the panel which held the glass in front of the number. So I've cut the panel and made the cutout for the rubber and glass, which involved fitting the glass, realizing it was too tight, removing the glass, trimming the metal back and repeating, being extremely careful not to make it too loose as there wasn't a lot leeway with this particular rubber gasket. After several repeats of this procedure, I've taken the glass out and it slipped from my hand. Everything goes into slow motion. I can see this very non-standard glass falling to the floor, knowing it's my manager's baby and he doesn't like me very much anyway. Basically, I'm ready to be sacked. Then lo and behold, the glass hits the floor on its edge and bounces back up into my damn hand. I grab it between thumb and forefinger and just stand there stunned, looking around to see if anyone else witnessed this moment of complete impossibility. To this day, I haven't a clue how it didn't smash into 1,000 tiny pieces. Story 26. I was working at Walmart at the time, and I had moved from cashiering to customer service, where I did the same job, but backwards, I was handling returns. The list of how to handle returns, what is and isn't considered returnable per department, is practically a book. I was new. Wasn't familiar with all of the ways in which something could or couldn't be returned. I was not feeling well, and busy as damn. I didn't check a lawnmower for gas, which apparently was full to the brim. No managers were present other than the TLs, so one of them store uses a tool to get the gas out. It goes in her truck. Apparently, it's a big deal, so everyone stayed quiet. People liked me and didn't want me to get in trouble for an honest mistake. The TL did wonder how I didn't smell it. It was really, really strong. I had never had issues with my sense of smell. Normally, I'm pretty sensitive to stuff like that. I had COVID. Another time, I was doing money services, and this guy was paying his child support. There are multiple times in which the customer confirms the amount they are paying. I confirm it verbally, the card reader asks multiple times, and it's on the receipt. This guy comes in and mumbles through the transaction. He's paying $6 for child support. 6. What? 60? 600? It sounded like he said 600. I asked him out loud. You said 600? He nods and confirms it's correct. The PIN pad asks him to confirm the amount. The PIN pad tells him the total. I tell him the total verbally. It's around $603 and some change for the fee. I even emphasize on the zero in between 603. He marches back in not even an hour later, furious, because I charged him $600, not 60, even though I confirmed it so many times. But when I saw him marching back, I knew I had ducked up somehow, even though that wasn't my fault. I didn't question the amount because I've had people pay much more than that in child support, so this wasn't something I had never seen before. The problem got fixed, but I was sure I was going to get written up or something for that. But everyone was familiar with the hundreds of questions they're asked before paying and knew it wasn't on me. Story 27. I grew up in a religious and extremely strict house. I was not really ever allowed to hang out or sleep over at people's houses. When I was 16, I made a friend at work and was allowed to hang out with her almost daily, despite my mother not liking her. One day, we started experimenting with me sneaking out to go on adventures with them. They didn't have to sneak out because their parents were awesome. I have 2 stories from this time period. One night, I snuck out at around 10 p.m. after my parents had gone to sleep. At around 10:30, I started to get a weird feeling and asked my friend to drive me home. As I was walking around the back of my house, our normal entrance, I heard the door click, locked. My father had woken up and double-checked the locks for no reason, locking me out. I stood there for a minute, panicking before accepting my fate. I knocked on the door. He looked at me and said, "Where damn were you?" To which I replied, "I was looking at the stars from the front porch and I fell asleep." He bought that one. A few weeks later, I snuck out again. It was winter, and we were pulling people behind my friend's car at the quarry in town. It was one of our favorite activities, and everyone had a lot of fun, no real injuries. It was 1 a.m. when her 94 Geo Prism got stuck on some ice and none of us could get it moving. We had to call her dad and woke her whole family up. He came and picked us up in silence. Luckily, because he knew my mom was abusive, he dropped me at the top of the street and told me to stop making risky choices while I lived at home. Anyway, 16 was a good year. Story 28. I have 2 duck-ups that both involve cheese fondue, something I make about once a year. My family likes to celebrate New Year's Eve with fondue. I make this by bringing white wine up to a simmer in a pot and then dropping in handfuls of shredded cheese that I've tossed with cornstarch to thicken the sauce. stirring it all in until a nice smooth sauce comes together. Duck up number 1. I had bought and prepped all my ingredients. Shredded Gruyere and Emmental cheeses coated in cornstarch, garlic, cherry brandy, dry white wine, and nutmeg. The first handful of cheese went into the pot and immediately foamed up. This doesn't normally happen, but the foam died down quickly, so I figured it wasn't worth worrying about and kept going. Each addition of cheese had the same effect. Worse, the sauce was not coming together at all. There was a layer of oil on top and a gloopy mess of melted cheese below that. I tasted it, hoping there would be some way to salvage it, but it was inedible salty. I went back and checked my ingredients, and only then realized that I hadn't grabbed the cornstarch, but a different yellow plastic can of fine white powder, baking soda. The second duck-up happened a different year, when I had what I thought was a brilliant idea to warm up the fondue pot before the cheese went into it. Fondue always thickens as it sits, and by the end it's tough to get any on your bread, so keeping this ceramic pot as warm as possible sounded like a no-brainer. I lit the sterno can under the empty pot and went to fetch my sauce from the stove, and as I returned I heard a loud crack as the fondue pot split in half, knocking over the stand as it fell down and spilling burning sterno onto my tablecloth. I managed to get the fire out quickly, but the tablecloth was ruined, and the surface of the table had a thumb-sized scorch mark on it. Fortunately, my neighbor owned an electric fondue pot, so we were able to enjoy our food after all. But I'll never forget the look on my wife's face when she realized what I'd done. This year, I'm letting my brother make the fondue. Story 29. Just yesterday, I was coming home from the pre-dinner walk, 5 p.m. road rush time. With my husky, I got to my door and like a total ducking idiot, I shuffled the order of operations. I unclasped his leash, then pulled out my keys to open my door, turned around, and my boy was gone. Spent 20 minutes playing what seemed like a fun game of tag for him, but was incredibly scary for me because he was weaving across busy roads. Finally got him, but it was totally a taifu, and I was glad that we all got home safe for dinner. Story 30. Used Borrow, my doggy, and looked after someone's dog a few times. I'd taken it to my brother's house, who has a secure garden. Dog was a mad head running around like crazy. He'd found some poo buried from a previous dog and was running around with it in his mouth. It was mad. I went out to the outside bin at the front of the house to chuck the crap, shutting the lounge door behind me, which led to the garden, and leaving the front door on the latch, but closed. As I turned to go back inside, the dog shot past me, like a damn greyhound. I shouted at some kid on a bike to please help me catch the dog. Kid ditched his bike dog, but dog was gone. I stopped traffic multiple times as he ran across busy roads. Almost lured him in with a plastic bottle, but he had some crazed look and just darted when in reach. He ran right through the neighborhood. I was at full sprint for 5 minutes, and he eventually ran into someone's garden with a fence. 2 neighbors' gardens. A group of students having a BBQ and some geezer came out to see what was going on. The dog proceeded to run in tight circles until it threw up, at which point the student had fashioned a lead from rope and I took the dog home. I don't know who damn opened the lounge door, but I fully thought the dog was going to die. It was truly horrendous biggest I've ducked up moment of my life. The owner had previously said I could take him off leash in the park, but he didn't have very good recall. He had no recall on the plus side. That dog got to feel a freedom I think he had been longing for a long time. He was asleep like a baby by the time she picked him up. Story 31. As a brewer, you likely will make this mistake once in your career. But mine happened way later in my career, which makes the duck up a bit more humiliating. I knew better. I was on the overnight shift and doing tank cleans and just finished knocking out a batch into a 1200 BBL fermenter. As I bent down to take the hose off the bottom of the tank, I reached for what I thought was the tri-clamp connecting it to the valve. I reached down and was at an awkward angle, so I turned my head to squeeze in and confidently removed the tri-clamp behind the valve and unleashed a firehouse worth of pressurized beer, all pressing through the 2-inch opening at the bottom. Here's the thing with liquid coming out with that force, is as you panic and try to put the valve back on and tri-clamp it to stop the flow. Your brain goes into overdrive and all rational thoughts fly out the window. You're getting blasted and struggling to breathe against the rushing beer. People can drown this way, but the way to correct this is open the valve, then hold the gasket on, stick the open valve back on, and swing a tri-clamp over it. Lock it, and close the valve. No, just shut down and do your best for a bit until you remember the correct way to go about it, and by that time you've dumped 600, 800 BBL across the cellar floor. That's what I did. Then you sit there and think about how you're going to wake the brewmaster up at 2 a.m. and let him know you just poured the equivalent of 19,200 cans of beer down the drain. A brewery is a great way to learn about a lot of duck-ups. Myself, and watching others included. I've seen some massive duck-ups. Story 32. A colleague at work wanted to try out some software that didn't have a trial. so I downloaded a torrent version. He installed it, and about half-hour later, he came to me and said his computer was acting funny. I went and had a look, and I could see each file one by one being encrypted by ransomware. This was just the beginning. His computer was hooked up to the company's Google Drive, so all of his infected files were synced to the cloud. From there, it was then synced to every machine in the office. One by one, everyone's files were being encrypted right in front of them. At this point, I started panicking and called my senior dev who rushed in from his day off. Then, the ultimate happened. Our company's files were all backed up on a local NAS drive, so of course the infected files were synced to that, and just as before, one by one, the NAS files were being nuked. In the space of an hour, I had single-handedly wiped out thousands of hours worth of client work. Best part, because it was a new type of virus. There was no fix for it, no decryption utility. The files were gone. We removed everyone's hard drives and put them in cold storage, and we pretty much started from scratch. Lesson to be learned: never back up your redundancies on site. Never download illegal torrents on company computers. Somehow I was not fired, but I fully expected to be. Story 33. This probably happened in 1998, give or take a year. I was in a high school computer class. Our teacher was a stereotypical sweet old lady, maybe a few years from retirement. I don't remember why, but she decided to go to the White House website, but instead of whitehouse.gov, she typed whitehouse.com in front of a class full of high school students. I just checked, and today, apparently, whitehouse.com is a betting site. Well, in 1998, it was an adult site. Story 34. High school gym class, playing street hockey in the gym. One of the guys in my class picks up the net and kind of jokingly pretends to throw it at me. I say, "Hey, it's all fun and games until you lose an eye." He just quietly puts the net down and walks away as I slowly remember, horrified, that he had lost an eye in a skiing accident a few years earlier. He had a glass eye, so it wasn't always immediately obvious. I wanted to melt through the bleachers. Story 35. One of my first jobs in journalism was working for a travel magazine. Great job. Got to travel quite a lot on my own as both journalist and photographer. One trip sent me to a really nice luxury spa in Switzerland, and I used my regular camera to take the photos there, but I also wanted to take some pics of the pool, which was halfway inside outside. So I bought a single-use underwater camera. My professional photographer friends had transitioned to digital already, but I still used film. I changed into my swim trunks and got into the pool, camera in hand. In my mind, I was still looking as a proper media man, but for some reason, everyone I asked refused, and quite rude even, me to take their picture, or to be part of the article I told them I made. I was frustrated and a bit surprised that these Swiss people were so negative to a travel journalist. Until I found 3 young boys, I guess around 12 years old. They loved the idea of being part of a travel article. However, I didn't get to take one photo before 2 angry-looking women dragged them away while looking very harshly at me. Why? What had I done? Then it dawned on me what they saw. A man in trunks with a cheap camera staging as a journalist. I quietly and quickly went to my very luxurious room and stayed there for the rest of the day. Story 36. I had just turned 18 and went to get my first tattoo. My mom hates tattoos, so I made sure to get it in a place she was unlikely to see, on my hip. Well, we both smoked cigarettes at the time, and she had run out. So when I got home, she rummaged through my purse to find some cigarettes, and she found the damn receipt for the tattoo. I hadn't even been home for 15 minutes. Story 37. So this was nearly 30 years ago. I was in my 20s and in an interview as a floral designer. The second part of the interview was creating a dried floral arrangement. All the other designers are there, chatting away, working on orders, listening to the local country music station. This was back in the day when there were actual radio DJs. I listened to the station regularly, but there was one female DJ I just could not tolerate. Her voice and personality just grated on my last nerve, and I just happened to be in my interview during this DJ's radio hour. Now I'll just say, I tend to verbalize my thoughts, and I just blurted out, "Ugh, I cannot stand her voice," radio DJ's name, "drives me nuts." I noticed all the designers' heads went down, and the boss/owner marched out and announced that DJ is her daughter. So you can imagine I did not get hired. But a year later, I received a phone call that if I'd like the job, it's mine. No way, I go, hoping beyond hope no one remembers. And nothing is said for a month or so until one day it's brought up when the boss was gone, and all the ladies are laughing. Everyone but the boss remembers. I worked there for a couple years, and to this day, as far as I know, the owner has no idea the person she hired is the one who still cannot stand the sound of her daughter's name. Story 38. As a teenager in the early 2000s, I had a sweet little job. Large commercial cargo vessels were being built in my town. When the vessel is nearly complete, there is always someone on board to keep curious people and such away from the vessel. In the weekends, that was me. I just needed to stay in the harbor on the vessel for 36H, that's all. I was allowed to bring one friend, and I was allowed to make use of nearly everything the vessel has to offer. new vessel again, and one evening I was a bit bored, so I went on a little exploration on this huge cargo vessel. I found the machine room. I was amazed by the massive engines and all the other equipment. I found what I thought was deodorant spray. I sprayed some in the air. Doesn't smell like anything? Let's spray some more. Suddenly, the fire alarms went off. I looked at the bottle. It said something, fire alarm tester. I didn't know how to turn everything off. I tried calling my boss, but he didn't pick up late in the evening. Before I knew it, there were like 5 fire engines next to me in the harbor. Oops. Story 39. About 20 years ago, I was repairing recycling trucks with those side bins used by the city of Montreal. One day, I had to repair an arm track, those that lift the bins when they're full. After finishing, I started the truck to get it out, put it in reverse, and backed up. Usually just putting it in reverse was enough to back up without touching a pedal, so when it stopped, I thought it needed a little push. Pressed the gas pedal and nothing happened. Stopped the truck, got out, and realized I had left the bins up in the air so it caught the garage door. Truck was okay. Garage door. Not so much. It's still closed, so I said nothing and left for the night. The day after, boss was inspecting the door with a giant V in it. To this day, I have no idea if they ever figured out who did it. I was let go a week sooner than expected of that summer job. But the boss told me it was because they had found a permanent worker. Funny note, most trucks were just patched up by kids, 18 to 25, at minimum wage with no experience. There, or were, at least, not safe to be around. I was a welder, not a mechanic. I did repairs that wouldn't have passed an inspection. Story 40. This is a stupid story that I love, but it sort of meets the criteria. I worked on a military base where we were allowed to use the landline phones, but if you were dialing a phone number that wasn't part of the network, you had to dial one first to get an outside line. So one day, I hear the guy on the opposite side of my cubicle wall pick up the phone, start to dial, then he goes, "Oh crap," and slams the phone down. It's immediately quiet, but I can hear him moving sort of nervously, like I could hear minor fidgeting. So I say, "Hey man, everything okay over there?" He responds with a nervous chuckle, Yeah, I just feel sort of stupid. I think it's okay, but I went to call a number that starts with 1 to 9 inches. I'm so confused. I have no idea what those words mean, so I'm sitting there for a minute trying to understand when it dawns on me, so after about 30 seconds of silence, I say, "It's 911, not 119. He breathes a sign of relief and picks up the phone to finish his call. This guy legitimately thought he had just called the cops and was terrified that he was going to get in trouble for it. Story 41. I was in grade 2. We were out for recess, and a kid said, "Hey, look at this," and did that thing with 2 basketballs where if you put one on top of the other and drop them so they hit the ground together, it sends the ball on top flying really high into the air. I'd never seen that before. I was amazed. I immediately picked the balls up and tried it myself. I gazed in awe as the basketball went flying through the air in a beautiful high arc. Amazement soon turned to horror as I watched the ball land directly on a teacher's head, bounce off, and then land directly on the head of the grade 1 girl who was crying and getting a Band-Aid put on. Whoops. Story 42. First restaurant job, went to grab something out of the walk-in. There was a 20-liter Cambro of tomato sauce in front of the item I needed, and when I went to move it, it slipped and fell from the shoulder-height shelf, hit the ground, and basically made a mushroom cloud of sauce. Covered me and splattered the walls, ceiling, and every other container in there. I froze, knew I was ducked, and opened the door. My hard-ass sous chef turned mid-conversation, looked at me for about 3 seconds, then yelled, "All hands on deck, grab rags." The whole kitchen jumped to it and stripped the fridge to start wiping down. I just started saying, "Sorry, damn sorry," and my sous said, "Go get changed." I thought for sure I was fired, or at least sent home. Grabbed a fresh shirt and apron and came down, and he walked up to me and put both hands on my shoulders and then smiled and said, "Ducking sucks, doesn't it? But it'll happen again. It's happened to everyone." And then people took turns telling me about their colossal duck-ups. I felt so much better. And luckily, we didn't need the sauce that day. But that immediate feeling of, I can't fix this, sucked so bad. Story 43. Went outside late one night to smoke in high school. Parents asleep, both having to work early the next morning. Got too high and was just on zombie autopilot going back into the house. Rang my own doorbell for some reason, not thinking about it. Heard the sound from inside and instantly snapped back to reality, realizing what I had just done. Dad comes to the door in underwear with a gun and isn't happy to see my high ass. Got grounded for a while, but I still crack up trying to figure out what I was thinking at the time. The peaceful nighttime outside high went out the window so fast as soon as I pushed the button, leaving me in a stupor of oops, I just really ducked up. Story 44. PS control tech, here one summer day, I was dealing with a rumbly tummy but decided to soldier through the day. Things were fine, I was just a little cramped and gassy. Fast forward to midday, I have a hornet's nest on my route. It's hanging from a branch about a foot above a mailbox, so easy peasy. I'll be in and out in like 10 minutes. So there I am in my bee suit, cutting a very angry nest out of a tree, The dust I use is kind of slow acting. And then it happened. The heat of the day, along with being in a bee suit, already made me sweaty, but I felt a new sweat form on my forehead, a sweat derived from both pain and fear. There I was on a public sidewalk, holding an active hornet's nest and being swarmed by them, and I'm on the cusp of crapping my pants and bee suit. That's when I realized I should have listened to my body that day. Story 45? Totally low stakes, but I find it funny now. Foreign language spoken final exam. We were specifically instructed not to lie. I was horrible at this language. My professor was well aware that I was horrible at it. I was asked if I had ever been to a country that natively speaks this language. I was so bad I confused the words for yes and no, and as a result I said yes. I had never been there. My professor was from there. Spent the whole rest of the time using the very few simple words and sentences I did remember to lie about what it was like in the country I had never been to. My brain likes to revisit that lovely final exam from time to time, and I just have a little giggle about how awkward it was. How hard is it to remember the words for yes and no? Also, ever try lying in a foreign language you can barely grasp? Story 46. I had a friend over before his college graduation. He graduated just a year before me, and he brought his brother over. It was intended just to be a chill hangout, but the two got out of control drunk to the point that my best friend and I were terrified, locked ourselves in my bedroom, and barricaded the door by the end of the night. It was bad. We could hear them wrecking the place and puking in the hall outside the bathroom, going from threatening us and banging on my bedroom door to like wailing crying to laughing and roughhousing with each other. Eventually, they fell asleep. The two woke up with such a hangover they forgot about graduation and started panicking, and I told them they had to clean up all their own puke before they left. He was aghast enough at his own behavior that he did actually stay and clean it. The rest of the place was left in a wreck, but the puke was all cleaned. But yeah, he missed walking at his graduation because he was cleaning his puke off my floor. Story 47. Went over the handlebars of my bike when I was a teen. I can still remember somehow flipping perfectly and hugging the tree I hit in front of me. I didn't get seriously wounded, just a few scratches. Some big, some small, but nothing deep. Made me reconsider all my life choices up till that point. Story 48. Used to do some amateur rock climbing. Got some loaner equipment, was taught the knots, and went out and had a lot of fun with friends. On the third or fourth outing, I get my gear set up and ascend a 50-feet wall. Things go well, and I reach the top when I realize that I tied the knot wrong. Had a death grip on the rope during the descent, and a firm shake of the knot made it come undone almost immediately. It was just the tension that held it together. The next time, I had friends double-check the knot. Story 49, a recent one. I was making a protein smoothie with a handheld electric mixer in a big cup. I don't remember what it was, getting old sucks, but I needed to grab something. What's fun is I even imagined the outcome before it happened. But another part of my brain just seemed to want to roll the dice and see if I could make it back before it happened. Remember, this is an electric mixer. It has a cord whose weight is pulling slightly on the top of the wand. So I carefully balanced the mixer in the cup near the edge of the island counter where I was preparing it and went to get whatever it was I was getting. I got like 2 steps away and, sure enough, sploosh! The cord pulled the mixer and cup over the edge of the counter, splashing protein smoothie all of the damn kitchen, including the refrigerator. Did anyone die? No. But I spent the next hour cleaning up pseudo-jizz from over, around, and under everything. Story 50, day before Thanksgiving, tracking a package, and waiting in the car as it's the very last thing we need before driving out of town. Delivery truck pulls up, driver gets out and starts walking in the wrong direction. I get out and ask, if he has a package for asterisk, insert my ex name, not my now fiance's name. I haven't had this ex for 4 years, haven't talked to this ex in 4 years, haven't thought about this ex in 3 years. I have no idea why my brain thought to say that name. And the only reason my current fiancé knows of her name is because she went and dug around on the internet a long time ago. I purposefully never bring up an ex name, and just as thoughtfully never ask current partners about their ex. It was probably the worst time for this also, as we were locked into a car together for the next 6 hours. Nearly ruined Thanksgiving. Story 51. Remember when iPhone rolled out the drawing effect on the phones and messages? I was playing around with it one day, and decided I was going to send one to my wife. I drew a huge, veiny junk with a lovely spray out the top. I thought it was so funny how when you sent it, it would animate really quickly, and I was laughing my head off. About 2 seconds after I sent it, I realized I didn't just send it to my wife, but I sent it to a group text that my wife was a part of, along with her boss, the head of the nonprofit she worked at, and a local pastor who was working with my wife's nonprofit on a local initiative. I have never wanted the unsend feature so badly. I never received a reply in the group text, but my wife called me about 5 minutes later and was not very happy. Story 52. My cousin announced her first pregnancy on the family WhatsApp group, and when I looked for an appropriate GIF, WhatsApp offered a history and my finger slipped onto the throwing up face. Mild enough, but still. Story 53, put my hand through glass window of my parents' front door. Was chasing my little brother around our new house. Legit moved in 2 days beforehand. I was like 19. Little brother was like 6. Slammed it to get away. Put my hand up to stop it. Was stained glass, so I freaked out, thought I was in huge trouble. Then felt something dripping down my hand. Looked down, was like someone just peeled my skin open, could see everything inside, like if I moved my fingers, all this crap was going up and down. Was like a light switched in my head. I was full serious. No crying, screaming. Nothing, just went straight to Dad, who was working on the car. He wrapped my hand in an oily rag. Doctor's recon. The oily rag saved my life. I cannot explain the calm over my body. Dad said he couldn't believe how casually I came to him about it. Story 54. On my first day at a new job, I was assigned the task of adding a user to an SFTP connection, something I'd done before without any issues. Confidently, I created the user, and everything seemed fine. But when I went to test it, the website was completely gone. It turned out that the new user directory I created had overwritten the main folder where the website was stored. Everything had been wiped out. I panicked and immediately called GoDaddy. Thankfully, they had a backup in place, and the site was fully restored within a couple of hours. Lesson learned. Oops. Story 55. This is pushing 25 years ago, but I can't unsee it. My best friend at the time, a bunch of us are walking home, hammered out of our tree, and goes to do the Dukes of Hazzard slide, that's how old we are, across a parked car. Stupid, yes. Immature, yes. Drunk, yes. He slides, but it's so dry he stops and spins on the hood so that he's looking directly into the windshield, directly at the driver who is getting head at the time. I've never seen bigger deer in headlights' eyes from 2 people at the same time in my life. Story 56. Intended to send my daughter, who was home alone, a pic of my credit card so she could DoorDash food. Sent it to the mom group chat of my son's football team by mistake. Story 57. My old college friend worked at a regional Comcast office. During a particularly bad thunderstorm, he got the bright idea of saving the office the possibility of a losing data to a bad lightning strike by pulling the plug out of the wall to their main rack servers, not knowing that Comcast had a generator and safeguards to prevent surges from happening. Needless to say, Comcast customer service for that region was down for an hour. Service calls were backlogged, and he was carried out the door by security and fired. Story 58. When riding a sport bike at a local track, I was at the end of a straightaway going at around 150 miles per hour when I grabbed the brakes and the front lever went to the bars. No pressure. I had just put new pads in and did not do a lap or 5 to make sure all was well. It wasn't. Story 59. I worked at a college bookstore that made you leave your backpack at the front of the store. We had a sign that you couldn't miss because it was in the middle of our doorway. I see a mom and son and he's got his backpack on. No biggie. Easy conversation. Me. Hello? Need help finding anything? Mom. Nope. Me. Okay. We don't allow backpacks in the store. So if you could please go drop yours up front, that would be great. Son, I didn't know that. Me. It's not a big deal. You'll see a sign up front by some cubbies where you can drop your backpack. Mom. See a sign? Me. Yeah, it's up front. You can't miss it. Mom. He can't see. He's blind. I looked at her son, and then I noticed the cane in his hands. I said I'm sorry, at least a dozen times, and went into our storeroom to die of embarrassment. Story 60. I used to work as a sysadmin for a large online retailer, was making plans installing new roles on the main Hyper-V cluster, RD as was wanted, playing around with menus, making sure all the steps are there. Finally got to the Go page and hit cancel. With that, the menu disappears happily and starts rebooting. It wasn't meant to reboot. Why is it rebooting? What happens next is the longest 45 minutes of my professional life. I watch the server reboot in shame. We have a cluster for mistakes like this. Then the phone rings. Our dispatch system has stopped working. Then another system goes off. I managed to not only shut down a server, but completely break the cluster. The first one came back. I managed to restore storage before slowly bringing the other 2 back in. Had to reboot every individual VM as well as they were all borked. Story 61. It was 2011, and internet was kind of new where we lived. I had booked an application online for an exam, really important one, for an entrance in a college. And since only I had internet in my area, I booked it for a couple of friends as well. I'm a very laid-back guy, and for some reason I remembered the date I booked our slot as 21st. Come 20th night, as usual, I'm downloading my admit card at the last moment, only to find that our exam was M19. Not only did I duck my own life, I did it for the other friends who were dependent on me. Fee, about $150 per head. Story 62. There was a time where I was working my full-time job from home while living with my parents. Some issue with my job came around and I was moved to part-time. That lasted for a few months and I didn't want to break the news to my parents, so for months, I was just pretending to work for a few extra hours each day, 5 days a week, for months. I eventually got my full-time position and benefits back, and it's been a relief even though I have to work more often. It was like a perpetual state of I ducked up that just lasted for way too long. It was an embarrassing secret. It still is, kind of. I don't think I want to let them know I was in that rut until I'm older and no one really cares. Story 63. My cast iron pan slipped out of my hand because I didn't dry it properly after rinsing. It was late, and I wanted to reduce the noise, so I thought I could convince the pan to not follow gravity by putting my clenched fist in its path. The pain in my hand instantly told me that it wasn't the brightest of ideas. Story 64. I came home to my parents' house pretty drunk. They were asleep. I proceeded to slip on the stairs, going down to my bedroom, and in falling down, ripped the entire 10-foot banister off the wall. Somehow, they did not wake up. Told them the next day I just slipped and fell and it was an accident, and they believed me. Helped my dad put it back up the next day. Years later, I'm pretty sure he knew, but he's never asked about it. Story 65. My wife and I have been married for 18-ish years, and when people ask us how long we've been married, as a joke, I've always said 30 years or 80 years. I just throw out some stupid large number, with the joke being that we've been with each other for what seems like an eternity. I'm at a wedding for a couple in their 70s, and the bride and her adult children make the mistake of asking me how long we've been married, and I say 46 years. Funny joke. Turns out that's exactly how long she was previously married to her now deceased husband, and everybody thinks I'm in weird a hole, and on some level, they are correct. Story 66. I was being a good person and driving a coworker to pick up his car after work. He dropped it off in the morning, and by about 3 p.m., they'd already called having completed the repair. So, at 5 p.m. when we got off of work, I drove him over to the mechanic shop. I was in the turn lane, and though oncoming cars were pretty close, I knew if I gunned it a bit, I could make it. And I did. What I didn't do is remember how devastatingly steep their driveway was. My little 93 Pontiac bottomed out on their driveway, snapping 2 engine mounts and shattering both my oil and trans pans. At least I was pulling into the parking lot of a mechanic I trusted. Story 67. I was in a fight on the school bus with another kid, and I pushed his head into the window, and it cracked his head open. Got the book thrown at me. He threw fists first, though, but I didn't mean for it to happen like that. I don't really care he hit me first, TBH. I would never hurt someone to that degree on purpose. It was a combo of adrenaline, and me not knowing my own strength as I was going through puberty. Straight up could have killed him. Or brain damaged him. Thank God I didn't. Story 68. I was like 10, and I snatched this bully's money. It was like $2, but ice cream was $2 back then, so I planned to eat it in the bully's face. I put the money in my pocket. The bully complained that her money was missing to the teacher, so the teacher started frisking everyone. I didn't count on that. My soul left as I was standing in line to be frisked. Eventually, the money was found, and I was sent to the principal's office and called a future thug thief. I cried, and my parents were called, and I was expecting a beating at home, but my mom looked like she just wanted to not deal with it anymore, so she didn't say anything. Story 69. Once sent a work email to my entire contact list instead of just my boss. Total panic mode when replies started flooding in. Learned to double-check recipients after that epic fail. Story 70. I was starting a new job, and my manager was taking me around to meet all the people in the office. He took me in to meet the big boss, the guy in charge, the captain. He said, "And this is Jean-Luc Picard," and I laughed. He was the captain. The captain didn't laugh. He was an actual Frenchman, and his name was Jean-Luc Picard. He was sick of the comparisons and struggled with it regularly. Apparently, he had hotel reservations canceled on him because people thought it was a joke. He was very cold to me from then on. Story 71. In high school, my first girlfriend and I were not a couple yet, just friends with crushes on each other, and I was really oblivious to the fact that she had a thing for me. She said something, and I replied with, "That makes me so mad, I want to beat a penguin." A little bit later in the conversation, she asked what animal I thought she looked like the most, and I instantly said, "Oh, definitely a penguin." As the words were leaving my mouth, I realized that I had probably just ruined everything and was a huge idiot. But she just said something like, "Huh, I guess I do," and laughed. Story 72. The joiner at my workplace taking off the shield guard on the saw so he could drag the thing he was working on through, along with 3 knuckles and a chunk of the back of his hand. Last I heard, he had to have multiple amputations. I was working nearby when it happened, and all I could hear was, "Oh, damn, oh no, oh, that's bad, oh no," etc., etc. Story 73. Mine's quite gentle. We were prank calling people from a new mobile I just got. Late 90s. I didn't realize, but my friends called my parents' house. I start breathing heavily and making weird noises, and my dad instantly recognized me, said he could see me from the window. We were just down the street, and asked what I was doing. I hung up and ran out for sight. Perfectly inconspicuously, I might add. Story 74. I had been in Mexico City and didn't get sick from drinking small amounts of the tap water there. Then I got to a much smaller mountain town and swallowed some of the tap water while brushing my teeth, then went to my dorm room. There was a German woman laying on one of the beds, sick as duck from drinking the tap water, and I knew I was totally screwed. I had really bad Montezuma's revenge for like 5 days. Story 75. When I was around 8 years old, I answered the phone to hear a family friend on the other end. She has a lot of kids and they'd make a ruckus during church. We were Mormons at the time. So I shouted to my mom, "Mom, the lady from church who cannot watch her kids is on the phone." My ass got whooped, and I had to say sorry to her that very next Sunday. But I still don't feel bad about it, because that's how everyone described her behind her back. Story 76. When I texted a nude to my fiancé, but realized too late it was to his work phone number rather than his personal. Thankfully, he was able to delete it before any of his coworkers saw it. Story 77. When I lived in Texas, I was working in the yard, wearing shorts, and knelt down right onto a fire ant mound. Once I felt the bites. I did the fire ant dance and then got the hose to wash them off. Not too many bites, and they didn't get to my crotch, so it was a win. Then a few minutes later, I did it again. The ants had not settled down from the first time and went at me with a vengeance. My knee was swollen for a few days and itched like mad. Story 78. Way back in the before times, I had a flip phone. It had an amazing utility software that allowed you to text from the software if it was connected with a USB cable, along with you being able to take snapshots and delete stuff. One time I sent a not spicy, but definitely suggestive text. My horror erupted as I realized somehow my idiot brain had selected every contact saved in my phone. In seconds, I had the cover off, the battery out, and the SIM card removed. It still went out to people such as my boss at work and my mom. Story 79. While working for an armored transport company, I changed lanes into a strip of snow I didn't see in time. The armored vehicle I was driving turned sideways and flipped. The vehicle ended up sliding a good distance on the side. The front armored glass exploded out of its frame and careened across every lane of traffic. My only thought before it tipped was, crap, I'm dead. Sometimes I think that I probably didn't actually survive, and this life in experiencing is actually just the last little bit of electrical activity in my brain. Story 80. When I was in the Army, I was an infantry officer who became the XO of a tank company due to Army shenanigans. My maintenance chief was out and we had to order a tank engine, so I was told to make it happen ASAP. Me and the maintenance chief's specialist tried our best to order it with Garmy. Accidentally ordered the engine for an older chassis or something. Can't remember the details. Anyway, when it came in, the mechanics were like 900K down the drain. We just tossed a tarp on it and left it in the motor pool. It's probably still there. Story 81. It wasn't my duck up, but back when I worked retail, from the opposite end of the shop, I hear smash, 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 and it kept getting faster. My coworker was reorganizing wines, and the back of the trolley he put them in gave out, and after just over 200 pounds, the cheap stuff, by the way, bottles worth later, I'm laughing at him as I'm pushing the cleaning machine. I was the only person in that knew how to use it, sucking up the wine that spread across 3 aisles, and he's scooping up all the broken glass. Story 82. I was a nurse in the ed and was discharging a rather, really, large woman to home. I took out her IV and sat her up slowly on the side of the bed as I reviewed the discharge plan with her and her husband. I asked her husband if he could help her get dressed as she was a bit unsteady after being in bed for quite a while. I then left the room, brightly saying that I was going to go out and get her a wheelbarrow. Story 83. I came home drunk one night and put a pot of beans on the stove and laid down. I woke up to the smoke alarm going off. The entire apartment was filled with a thick white smoke. To make things worse, I lived in a studio basement apartment with no windows. I got a text from my landlord upstairs saying she smelled smoke. I made up some BS saying I burned my breakfast at 5 a.m. I opened the door and let the smoke billow out. My apartment stank for the next 2 weeks. Story 84. I was remotely changing the IP address of a computer for a client. Just as I hit apply, I realized I'd fat-fingered the third octet. It promptly went offline. I had to shamefully tell my boss about it. He laughed and said, "You'll never make that mistake again. Have fun." Luckily, it was just 30 minutes away, and so I trekked out there to correct it on site. Now I'm a manager, and I use that story with new people on my team when they make a mistake and feel bad about it. Story 85. I was in college and late for class. It was one of those big lectures in an auditorium, so I figure I'll just sidle in and stand at the back so I don't disturb anyone. It was an art history class. The lights were off, so the prof could show us stuff on the projector. I slip in, press myself up against the back wall, and suddenly it's bright as day in the room. I thought it was just a coincidence. But then someone noticed I was leaning on a light switch. Story 86. When someone at the company I worked for went to reply to an email from the CEO to one specific person complaining about the contents of said email, but forgot to take the all-company employees distribution list off of his email, and he said some pretty nasty things that the whole company got to see. He was gone before the end of the day. Story 87. At my old restaurant job, a coworker came in one day in a crafty mood and asked, "Can you move?" when I was in her way. Because I already had to put up with so much bullcrap at that job, I turned around and said, "Can you take your attitude and shove it up your ass?" That coworker was the owner's daughter, and I got let go the next morning when I came in for my shift. Definitely a duck up, but I still don't regret it. Story 88. When the fire alarm went off at work, everyone was filing out. When we hit the corridor outside the elevators, everyone sort of bunched up. I'd been talking to a coworker, and when I saw a hand dart out from behind me, I assumed it was his. I said very loudly, "You can't use the elevator in an emergency, idiot." It wasn't him. It was the CEO, who was an idiot and was trying to use the elevator. Story 89. I'm married to a woman whom we will call Jane. I also work fairly closely with a Jane. One day, I was texting with work Jane about an urgent issue while sending some cute, flirty messages to wife Jane. I screenshotted our two text threads next to each other with my flirty messages visible and sent the screenshot to Jane saying, "Imagine if I sent this to the other Jane." I sent the damn screenshot to work. Jane. Story 90. I'm a new associate at a law firm. We're all supposed to run in a 5K. We show up at the appointed place, ready for the run. There's a guy there I've never seen. He's in an electric wheelchair. I ask the office manager, "Hey, who is the automated dude?" Her husband, Story 91, was messing with my cousin, who was about 3 or 4, and I let him race down the stairs in a washing basket. And just as I thought, what will happen when he runs out of stairs? He hit the wall face first and completely flattened his nose. And I was grounded for 3 months, and every once in a while my mom brings it up and I cringe so unbelievably hard. Story 92. English class, grade 10. I always stuck in the back corner and played New Vegas on my laptop because that's how easy the class was. One day I was sitting down, and I accidentally knocked the glass picture frame the teacher kept back there, and glass went everywhere. Teacher was pissed, but forgave me because it was an accident, and I started paying attention in that class after that. I know I have more stories, but I can't remember them. Story 93. Back in high school, a girl I knew got hit hard by the boob fairy over summer, and I thought it would be funny to call her Double D because of it. It stuck, and apparently she hated it, like a lot. I didn't know it, but she was getting bullied, and that nickname was being used as an insult. I felt like such in a hole when I finally learned the truth. Story 94. I used to play this game, Maple Story, back in like 2010, and I had some really rare equipment worth over $1 billion in game gold. I thought I opened the storage to trade items in between characters, but I opened a shop and, without thinking, I clicked all of my gear and sold it with no way of getting it back. Story 95. When installing things like intake manifolds, piston heads, etc., there is always a bolt-tightening sequence. This ensures you don't crack the piece while tightening it down. My dumb ass thought I had memorized the sequence for the engine I was working on, but I had not. I cracked an intake manifold and had to buy the customer a new one. That little crack cost me several $100s and almost my job. Story 96. Crap myself on an airplane. I really didn't want to use the airplane toilet, and by the time I realized I couldn't hold it, it was too late. 10 hours of sitting in my own filth like an animal while the entire plane gave me dirty looks. It was mortifying, and I have regular nightmares of the experience. Story 97. My sister was telling me her friend had never seen The Princess Bride. Obviously, this is a travesty, so I said, and I quote, "You should tie her to a chair and force her to watch it." My sister got quiet for a second and then replied, "She's already in a wheelchair." Story 98. I'm sure it's not my worst, but I once slammed my own head in a car door. It hurt and looked nasty for a few days with bruises and a little cut. When someone asked how it happened and I told them, the belly laughed and I got no sympathy at all.